Okay, welcome to our third learning lab on quantitative data collection and analysis in the context of using the UNHCR WFP Joint Analytical Framework, or JAF. So this is the third in a series of 6 webinars focusing on the JAF. And the fourth webinar, which is in a couple of weeks' time on Wednesday, at the same time in 2 weeks, will focus on qualitative data, and so is really complementary to today's session. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for that as well. So as we know, the JAF is a set of tools which help us to better understand the ability of refugees and other forcibly displaced people to meet their basic needs, be those food or non-food needs. And to get us started, I've got a first poll to understand your familiarity with quantitative data collection and analysis. So just let me launch this poll. Okay, so please, how familiar are you with quantitative data collection and analysis on a scale of 1 to 5, from being not at all familiar or totally clueless to being a total expert? Indicate how comfortable you feel with this topic. Okay, the responses are coming in. I'll just give it another minute or so. We're only a couple of minutes past the hour, so as people are joining, if you're joining now, please do fill out the poll. How familiar are you with quantitative data collection and analysis, the topic of today's session? We don't, 14% so far of total experts, that's good. Okay, so a range, some responses are still coming in. A range of responses. Most people, so 35% feel they're about at level 4, 15% at level 5. A small number of you are not at all familiar with quantitative data analysis. Whatever level you're at, we hope that you'll be able to get something out of today's session. We have a great group of presenters. Lorenzo Moncada from WFP, data analyst. Hi, Lorenzo. Maybelline Villarreal from UNHCR, Statistics and Data Analysis Officer. Guillermo Rodriguez from the Joint Hub, Data Analyst and Assessment Officer, and myself, Olivia, also from the Joint Hub, Monitoring and Learning Officer, and I'll be facilitating the session today. So if we come on to the content and learning objectives, by the end of today's learning lab, we hope, so over the next 45 minutes or so, including time for questions, we hope that you should be able to define the scope of quantitative data collection, apply the JAF tools, both the analysis plan and the questionnaire, and describe and possibly conduct the main types of data analysis when using the JAF. And obviously, depending on your background, how you use and apply the content from this learning lab will vary. You know, if you're already highly skilled in quantitative data analysis, by the end of the webinar, you should feel comfortable using the tools, using the analysis plan, the questionnaire, using the tools in your analysis. However, if this is not your area of expertise, nevertheless, you will be able to understand what the process is and what's involved, and be able to oversee the process, use the data from the process for decision making, etc. So we hope it will be really useful for you. So yes, an overview of the process. We saw this slide in the first and second webinars. On the left, we have a diagram of the JAF showing all the topics that can be included, from national to community to household level. And on the right, we have an overview of the process. Of course, it's really important for WFP and UNHCR and other partners who might be using the JAF to agree on the joint objectives initially, then to conduct a desk review, a secondary data review, which we saw in the last webinar, particularly in the case of an assessment, so that we understand what data we already have, what the gaps are, what additional data needs to be collected. And then we come on to the step of identifying the scope of the data collection, be that quantitative or qualitative data collection. And that's what we're focusing on today for the quantitative part. the collection, the scope, the collection, and the analysis. And then, of course, the result, the analysis, are used to inform and modify programming. Now I will hand over to Guillermo to talk more about defining the scope of quantitative data collection. Over to you, Guillermo.
Thank you, Olivia. Hello, everyone. We can move to the next slides, where I wanted to show you again this visual you've seen a number of times already on the joint analytical framework scope, also in the last sessions. I think you know by now that our joint analytical framework is structured along 3 levels: the national environment, the community settings, and the household characteristics, having all these then kind of feeding into the measurement of the ability to meet basic needs. In the last webinar, we touched on the national environment level, quite relevant for the desk review particularly, where we make sense of the national context with those topics you have in the screen. We will be looking at the community settings level in the next session, in the next webinar, focusing on the qualitative data collection in a couple of weeks, I think, which is more related to data collected in focus group discussions, in key informal interviews. And we will be today focusing very much on the household characteristics level in this light blue, and on the ability to meet basic needs. Those would be the two points we'll be focusing on. And we'll be starting by the second one, the ability to meet basic needs. This is, we can indeed move to the next slide. Thank you, Olivia. The way the joint analytical framework proposes to measure the ability to meet basic needs, which is a way to frame the vulnerability, it is very much aligned with the essential needs approach the WFP has been working on and developing for a number of years now. The way we measure within the JAF the ability to meet basic needs is based on 3 indicators. Those 3 indicators you have on the screen: the food consumption score, the economic capacity to meet essential needs, also called very often ECMEN, and the livelihood coping strategies. These 3 indicators aim to cover the 3 areas, the 3 fields that are linked to vulnerability in the type of context where the JAF is supposed to be applied. You remember from our first webinar, we're talking about joint operations, context, humanitarian context of basic needs assistance, kind of. This is not for specific programs on specific sectors. This is basic needs assistance, even both whether cash or in kind. So these 3 indicators aim, as I'm saying, to cover 3 areas relevant to the definition of vulnerability as we are proposing it: food security type of food consumption, rather, the economic expenditure driven type of vulnerability, and the protection type of vulnerability partially measured by the livelihood coping strategies. By combining these 3 indicators, as I said, completely in line with the way WFP does it in the essential needs approach, we're able to build the vulnerability levels. We are able to categorize households by the type of vulnerability level in which they are, whether extremely vulnerable, highly vulnerable, moderately vulnerable, or least vulnerable. This little circle we have on the bottom right of the screen is, of course, an example from a country we've been working on. This is the way we measure vulnerability. Now, of course, all the elements coming from the other levels, all the data we collect throughout the different exercises, quantitative, qualitative, informs and completes and the conclusions we are driving from these 3 indicators to build the vulnerability levels. And all this additional data will help us interpret what these levels, these vulnerability levels, are conveying. Okay, we will be using All the other topics we'll be touching on, particularly today, but also in our next webinar. But these three indicators, so to say, are like the core indicators for us to measure vulnerability or ability to meet basic needs. In the next slide, we can see now the household characteristics, as I'm saying, additional data to further interpret, understand what the vulnerability in the context is, measuring existing capacities, measuring further protection conditions. The topics within these household characteristics are the ones you see on the screen: demographics, social demographics characteristics, quite typical in household service, that we might need joint needs assessments or joint PDMs, joint monitoring exercises. We recommend looking at specific protection needs. We normally do not collect these additional data on protection ourselves, but we might extract them from existing UNHCR data, maybe on progress, maybe the specific needs codes, the PSN codes. We propose looking at sources of income, asset ownership, access to services, access to information and feedback, intra-household power dynamics, kind of gender data, and safety and security. This is kind of a menu. These are the different, we aimed at mapping the different areas that it might be interesting for a joint operation to look at data on, but it depends on the country offices to decide what is relevant for the context where they are. In the next slide, you have a little joke we wanted to share with you. It is a little guy telling his colleague, get all the information you can. We'll think of a use for it later. Well, do you think the assumption of this little guy is right? No, it is not right. And one of the points we wanted to share with you and highlight today, it is, and we will be looking more in detail now on the different indicators for each of the topics. Anything you conduct in your operations need to be context specific, and you need to make sense of, you need to adjust even sometimes to your context, whatever data collection exercise, data analysis exercise you are conducting. In the next slide, we're going to enter now the JAF analysis plan that we proposed. An analysis plan is a key element in any data collection exercise, and of course for the analysis of the data later. It allows for two things. It allows us for, first, having a good list of the data we do need, instead of those pieces of information we don't need to collect data on or to analyze data on. So to have the final list of the indicators we are interested in. And secondly, it is very useful to guide the analysis of the data later, as my colleague Lorenzo will be taking you through. Now, I wanted to, and please do not, I don't want to scare anyone, but I wanted to share with you the sheer JAF analysis plan. There are two slides on this. Perhaps, Olivia, you can very quickly go to the second slide from everyone to see, and then we go back to the first one. This is the JAF analysis plan. This is a list. We can go back to the first. This is a list where you have on the left the list of topics, as I already read for you on the first slides, both from the ability to meet essential needs, basic needs, and on the household characteristics. The factors are some kind of sub topics that give more detailed information about what we mean. And then you have the list of specific indicators we might be interested in looking at in any joint quantitative data collection exercise. Examples of these within demographic characteristics, demographics, you can see percentage of households by sex of the household head, percentage of households by education level of the household head, average size of households within sources of income, for example. You can see within debt, percentage of households that have access to credit, households by main source of credit, etc., etc. As I insisted before, This is a menu. This is a proposal of what we saw in our experience in joint operations, either in joint assessment missions or in joint PDMs, of what is useful, of what we typically collect data on. But we also try to have here on the right a column providing you information on what we think is essential to be collected, rather in all operations globally, and what we think it is rather optional. It depends on the objectives of the program related to this data collection, on the context where we are, on the specific circumstances around the program we're interested in and the objectives it has. So in blue, you have those rather essential indicators in our view, and in gray, those rather optional. In the second slide, now we can go. You see a larger percentage of rather optional for the country offices to look at. In my final slide, you can see where all these tools and resources are already publicly available. You can find them on the website, Joint Hub website. We provided the link in the slide, and on the bottom right, you have, as I said, you can click on once you go on the website, and you have the JAF analysis plan, as I just showed to you, with all the different indicators and topics. So I will be giving you back the floor, Olivia, and we can have questions and answers later. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Guillermo. Yeah, there are a couple of questions that we can deal with that you can answer at the end that relate to what you've just presented. Okay, so now we come on to the section about developing the quantitative questionnaires, and I have a poll for you. So I'm just going to launch this poll. Okay, here we go. So, what challenges have you all faced when developing questionnaires? Identifying what topics to include, formulating the questions, ensuring that data is collected in the standard way or can be comparable, agreeing with partners or other agencies what to include in the questionnaires, and the questionnaire always gets too long. And I think you can click on more than one answer here if relevant. So let us know what challenges you have faced in the past when developing questionnaires in your experience. Submit your answers. I see some answers coming in. Yeah, a bit of everything. Give people another few moments to fill in the poll. All right. And I hand over to Maybelline. Maybelline, can you see the answers to the poll?
Yeah, I can see. It's interesting that actually the option with more votes is the last one, that the questionnaire always gets too long for the moment. And it's interesting actually because I'm going to try to cover the development and the data collection tool, also aiming at having the length of the questionnaire to keep it as short as possible, right? So now I'm going to cover the development of the questionnaire and the data collection tool. So next slide, please. The development of the quantitative questionnaire, for you to know, and as Guillermo was pointing out, took into consideration already existing data collection tools, like those in progress or the specific need codes, among others. Olivia, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you so much. So the questionnaire at the household level corresponds to a set of questions that are directly related to the analytical framework and the analysis plan that Guillermo just presented. And it can be adapted taking into consideration the data and information needs and specific contexts. So actually, we are not in the situation that the questionnaire also gets super long, and we include modules or questions that are not necessary to be collected. The questionnaire is also meant to be used as added to a existing household survey. So we can say that actually the questionnaire, it's mainly composed by 3 different parts: the ones on the household characteristics, the one on the ability to meet basic needs, and safety and security at the household level, as Guillermo was mentioning. And all the questions in this quantitative questionnaire refer to the household as the unit for which we are collecting information, with the exemption of section 1.3, that is the household roster, and it's intended to gather information on each of the members of the household. There are some subsections within section 1.3 that relate to specific members of the household based on their age or based on the category of the household head they have. And whenever this is the case, it's going to be indicated in the instruction of the questionnaire. So this is how the table of contents of the quantitative questionnaire looks like at the household level. It has a total of 11 different sections that correspond to different topics within the analytical framework at the household level. And the questionnaire is structured in such a way that it aligns to the classification between the essential and optional that Guillermo also mentioned. This time, essential and optional modules that are based on the analysis plan and the JAF list of variables that are also part of the toolkit that we are providing. For those modules that are highlighted in yellow that are optional, whether the relevance on the questions are highly dependent on the specific context in which the household survey is conducted. So in the end, the decision on whether to include certain modules that are marked as optional or certain questions relies on the country teams. There are also some questions that are part of optional or essential modules that are indicated to be adjusted dependent on the context, and there are instructions whenever this is the case. It is important also to highlight that it's a work that has to be very closely done together with field teams and interpreters in order to ensure that the final version of the questionnaire that is going to be used for the collection is culturally sensitive, is comprehensive, is coherent, and is coherent. So next slide, please. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all the different modules and questions that are part of the questionnaire. So I will rather show an example on how to get from an indicator that is part of the analysis plan to the survey question that is part of the quantitative questionnaire. So the indicator of the example here refers to the percentage of households by education level of the household head, which is under topic of demographic characteristics and the factor demographics. And all indicators that are part of the analysis plan have a correspondence to one or different variables that underlie the calculation of the indicator itself in the JAF list of variables. The list of variables, apart from containing the list of variables for the calculation, also have information about the description and the level and the different frameworks that are related, and more information that I'm sure that you will find super useful. So next slide, please. For the level of the level of education of the household head, that is the variable that underlies the calculation of the indicator for the example, there is only one variable that relates to that is 1.3.20 in the quantitative questionnaire, that actually asks what is the highest educational level completed by the individual. This specific question belongs to the section that I was mentioning before, 1.3, that intends to gather information about each of the individuals of the household. All questions in the quantitative questionnaire follow the same structure that I'm presenting here. This means that actually they start with the number, in this case 1.3.20. Then the question is in bold, and right before the question, you will find information on the variable name and the variable type. And right after the question, there is sometimes in brackets instructions on the requirements that have to be taken into account for this specific question. So in this case, it is said that the responses need to be adjusted to the country's specific context. Right after the brackets, you will find some clarifications. In this example, the clarification is addressed to the enumerator, meaning that it's indicated not to read all the options out loud, but to weigh the respondent answer and then categorize all the options. Sometimes you will find skip rules right before or right after each of the questions. And these are basically indications on who are supposed to answer this question, the question that's between the two instructions, and who is supposed to keep answering the following question. For instance, in this case, 1.321, that is also indicated as an optional question. Next slide, please. So that would be everything for the quantitative questionnaire perspective. You will be able to find the questionnaire in Word format in the JAF resource center, as well as the JAF variable. And we are working toward providing the questionnaire also in different formats. That's all. Thank you, Livia.
Thank you so much, Maybelline. Great. So yeah, that's really useful. So the indicators are there. You can create a questionnaire. The question format is already there. So it really helps to standardize the whole process and very helpful for people when developing questionnaires. Now let's go on to the last section, which is about conducting the analysis. And I've got another poll for you. So what is your main, let me launch it actually. What is your main challenge when conducting data analysis for household surveys? So the data analysis part. And here this is a word cloud, so you can please write in either a word or a short phrase. I think you can write in more than one response. So I'll just give you a minute to write in the main challenges that you've experienced when conducting data analysis for household surveys. Okay, responses coming in. Data is big. Accuracy, incomplete data, missing data, scaling the data, cleaning, programming languages. Okay, any more responses coming in? Okay, interesting. The volume of data. All right. Lorenzo, I hand over to you. Any comments on what you're seeing here in terms of people's experience?
Right. Thanks, Olivia, and hi all. No, I would say that all the classics have been mentioned. The challenges that we always struggle with in conducting data analysis with household surveys, but hopefully this work that we're presenting should ease some of these typical challenges that we face. So there is room for some optimism, I would say. Then, yes, if you like, we can start with the last part of this presentation on data analysis, as you will have understood. Next, please. So I would like to start by giving a little overview of, in practice, what are the main components of the typical analysis that would be conducted based on JAF. Of course, I mean, it will depend a bit depending on the exercise that you're conducting, be it assessment or monitoring exercise. But in general, we usually tend to have three main parts of the analysis. The first one is about presenting results on the characteristics of the population, so the characteristics of the households, which is the light blue part in our framework. The second block would typically be results related to the vulnerability of the population, so their ability to meet basic needs. And the third part is sort of a combination of the previous two. I think I also saw a question on this in the chat. In this part, we have a vulnerability profile of the population. So we cross vulnerability and characteristics of the population for the households. But let's see some examples of how all these elements look like in practice. The first on household characteristics is quite trivial. I just put two examples here. You will have, for example, figures related to the sex of the household head, but also on a topic like the type of cooking fuel used. So in this first part of the analysis, you will usually have quite a lot of, let's say, number of figures and charts related to the different topics that you will have included in the questionnaire. The second example is, next slide please, is the vulnerability related figures, which is just a different format of what Guillermo showed before. So here we have our vulnerability classification and divided into 4 vulnerability categories, from least vulnerable to extremely vulnerable. This is often of course, the part of the report of the analysis that will be more sensitive, that will draw more of the attention of the reader. And then to the next slide, please. We have an example of the third typical component of the analysis, the vulnerability profile. Here, we simply show how the characteristics of the population differ based on the vulnerability level. For example, in the first row, you can clearly see how here the more vulnerable the households are, so going from right to left, the more likely they're headed by a female member, just to give an example. So what do we use this for? This is important because this usually gives interesting insights for the design and targeting of our programs. We understand who are the most vulnerable, or maybe we're interested in the moderately vulnerable for a different type of program. And thanks to this profile, we're better able to understand their characteristics to do a program that responds to their needs, but also if we need to target them, to identify them. Next slide, please. Okay, now the theory, going a bit more into the practice. You might be wondering who should conduct all this in joint operations. And for this, let's say the possibilities are quite open, but what I would like to show is that in the analysis plan template that is provided in the JAF website, in this template, there are some columns. I mean, there is a format that can help you to plan, to organize this analysis phase. In the next slide, I put some examples of how this can be populated. For example, you can agree on the responsibility of certain, of the computation of certain indicators and variables, who should do it, put a deadline, and log comments along the way to keep track of the process. So this is a little probably trivial, but I think a useful tool that could facilitate your work in the operations. In the next slide, instead, I would like to show how another tool that it's in the toolkit, so the list of variables that was already introduced, can also be very useful to locate a number of resources that we have available for conducting this analysis. That's another question that I saw in the chat. Do we have guidance on how to calculate all these indicators and variables? Likely, I mean, you will not have to reinvent everything from the beginning, because at least for the main corporate indicators that are included in this quantitative questionnaire, we do have standard guidance, but also standard syntax, training materials for analysts and enumerators. And in the variable list, you can find that it's in the column called analysis. So you see here we have the example of the indicators that are used to classify households in vulnerability categories. And we can take, for example, the food consumption score and see, if we move on, how we have a link that has a lot of resources to analyze this indicator. So in this case, in the specific case, the link would bring you to the VAM Resource Center, where, as I said, you can find guidance on how to compute the indicator, but also standard syntax, usually in 3 programming languages, SPSS, data, and R, but also presentations for training enumerators. Yes, and with this, I will conclude. I hope all these resources and tool. Sorry, I forgot to show an example of how the syntax files that are stored in GitHub look like. If you can click once more, this is the example about the food consumption score. So as I was saying, I hope all these tools and resources can really make your life easier when conducting data analysis with the JAF. And over to Olivia. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo. And as all the presenters have mentioned, these tools are all available on the JAF website. I think I put the link in the chat. So do check out the website and use the tools. We have a series of 6 webinars. This is the 3rd one. You can also sign up for future webinars on the JAF website. I'll put the link for the next one in the chat as well. And yeah, now we have time for questions. So thank you. Our contacts are here. We'll share the presentation after this webinar. Please do get in touch. But we have time now, 10 minutes or so, to answer your questions live. And I see that there are a few interesting questions in the chat. Lorenzo, you already answered one question, I think. I'm just looking up in the chat. There was an interesting question about how the 3, a question from Christian. Is there any guidance available on how the 3 essential indicators are aggregated into an overall vulnerability score, vulnerability status? Would any of the presenters like to take that question? Guillermo, I see you nodding. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can
Great,
take that
thanks.
one. There's a couple of questions actually on the essential needs, on the indicators to measure the ability to meet basic needs. There is a specific guidance on how to combine these 3 indicators from WFP on the essential needs approach guidance. We can share now that in the chat. There is actually already a link within the JAF description. One of the files you have already hosted in the website we've been showing. There is a link to this guidance. Let us put it back. It is quite straightforward. Also on the resources shared by Lorenzo on how to specifically calculate these indicators, you have some script regarding how to build a vulnerability on the essential needs approach. So that you can find it there. There's another question on the essential needs approach on whether the indicators, the 3 indicators to measure the ability to meet basic needs are at household level. Yes, they are. And why they are placed differently from the household characteristics. We place them in a different place to give them the importance they have. And in this analytical framework, they are core, as we wanted to highlight. But if you realize they are included in the analysis plan already in the screen we showed, and also in the household survey questionnaire, in the questionnaire for the quantitative data collection. And I'm going to take another question regarding what is the frequency of the vulnerability categorization. Well, this depends. I mean, every time I would say we conduct a quantitative data collection exercise. It is kind of one of the results of analyzing the data of one of these exercises, a joint needs assessment, a joint PDM, is to build the levels of vulnerability. Also, in a way, we can compare with previous assessments and previous joint PDMs to see the trend of vulnerability a long time. How often should we conduct these joint PDMs and joint needs assessments? Well, that depends on the context and on the country, of course. Those are some of the questions I highlighted here. Over to you, Olivia. I don't know if my colleagues want to.
Thank you, Guillermo. Thanks for answering all those questions. I see another question which is quite related, which is about the context, and are indicators grouped under emergency context situations or protracted situations or phases, depending on the stability or context. Would anyone like to answer that question? Are the indicators specific to emergency or more protracted contexts?
I can take it as well.
Thanks, Guillermo.
If I'm not sure I understand the question rightly, it is whether, as you're saying, these indicators are only for emergencies or for protracted. They are.
That's how I understand the question. Yeah. If you use different indicators in different contexts.
They're not. It can be in both kind of situations, as far as we remain within the scope of the joint analytical framework. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're talking about joint programs, joint humanitarian programs of displaced populations in a context of basic needs assistance. Not other specific programs. We're not talking about shelter. We're not talking about health. We're talking about this either normally cash assistance or in-kind assistance. So it's generally more related to perhaps to emergency context, but it could be also protracted very well as far as we remain within this scope.
Thank you. And we have the indicators that are essential. So the breadth of analysis might be, well, depending on what your needs are, but you might have a more in-depth analysis if it's a more protracted situation. And if you're more in an emergency context, you might focus more on the essential indicators. I don't know if that's right, Guillermo, potentially. Because there's the essential and there are also the optional parts in terms of the breadth of the analysis. I think we've covered in your answers most of the questions, because a couple of the questions covered similar topics. Presenters, Maybelline, Lorenzo, do you see any other questions in the chat that I've missed and that you would like to respond to that we haven't responded to yet?
I think this one about RIM, short.
Yeah.
This one about I think the last two we didn't cover.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I see RIM's question. I'm wondering if the vulnerability profiles or examples can be used to identify people in need and contribute to the percentage of population in need, or whether these are not considered as outcome measures and thus cannot be used to identify people in need. This question, Lorenzo?
Yeah. I think it's.
Thanks.
I think it's a very important question, man, because this can generate some confusion sometimes. So the answer is no. So for assessing the number of people in need, we have a vulnerability framework, and that's the power, that's the beauty also of this JAF, because that's the whole point of the exercise. This means we have an agreed framework, an agreed way of identifying the percentage of people in need in the population, and this does not need to be negotiated every time. But at the same time, what the vulnerability profile can be used for is to be a starting point to set targeting criteria to then identify people to be assisted in practice. So not for the profile is not for identifying the number of people in need in general, but yes, can be used as a starting point to develop targeting approaches to identify people to be assisted in the ground. And I don't know if Guillermo wants to add something on this based on his experience. Do you want to add something, Guillermo?
I think it's quite complete, as what you said. We make a strong difference in targeting between eligibility criteria, which needs to be correlated with vulnerability outcome indicators. And in targeting, I don't think we have, this is the place where to go further into this, but this is one of the key elements at the time of conducting targeting strategies and developing eligibility criteria. So exactly. I just see, Olivia, I see a couple of questions quite linked on using COBO AutoCAD tools for data collection and on building scripts. Just to say that the joint team from UNHCR and WFP, we are starting to work together to try to further populate this analytical framework with these type of tools. Lorenzo showed the wealth of resources currently in WFP archives, including scripts. For these specific indicators, those scripts are there. We're going to try to bring all this wealth also into the JAF, perhaps also translating it into R. Perhaps WFP already has it in R, which is more relevant for UNHCR colleagues. We aim at, cannot commit yet nor give deadlines, to build these questionnaires currently in Word into COBO and AutoCAD and Moda, depending on, to have them in a way that is more ready to use, so to say. So all this should be coming in coming months. As we keep working on it.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I think we've covered most of the questions. We're coming to the end of our time. Perhaps we can answer any remaining questions in the chat after the session. And I think with that, we should close for today. And we have another session on qualitative data. I just put the link in the chat, which will be in 2 weeks' time. So we hope to see you there. I'll also put the link in the chat for recordings of previous sessions, which are on the Joint Hub's YouTube channel. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, presenters. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye. Thank you.